Welcome, YouTubers. Something a little bit different today. We're going to talk about could the U.S. citizens defeat the U.S. military? And this kind of topic came from gun laws to start with, because it's about the Second Amendment right and bearing arms, and basically most people say the U.S. military would wipe out its citizens. But let's take a look at that just to see what would happen. So we did talk about the Second Amendment and gun law, gun control. It's a big debate nowadays. The right to bear arms is a militia to defeat enemies, foreign and abroad. So, again, a lot of people will think this is an obsolete amendment because back in the day, when we first started, weapons were very similar. When we won our independence from Britain in America, we had rifles, and that's kind of how we did it. Whereas nowadays, the military weaponry is out of your mind. GPS, bombs, F-14s, B-52s, all kinds of other weapons, right? That the average citizen doesn't have. So they get military superiority, and a lot of people will cite, the reason to bear arms or to have the Second Amendment or have no gun control, right, is that previous atrocities in the last 100 years or so, a lot of those countries stripped its citizens of arms, and they were defenseless. But we'll take a look at it here. I think America's a little bit different, although America certainly has a lot of guns. I'm not sure how you would even implement it. So let's go ahead and discuss if the U.S. citizens would have zero chance against its military. So one of the keys to population control by force, there's schools of law and other stuff like that, where how many police or military people do you need per thousand? Is it 20 or 25 per thousand? Is a good control number. Some people get away with less. All depends on the situation, but a lot of it depends on the number of people you're attempting to control. So obviously, if you've got a huge amount of people you're trying to control, the more difficult the task, right? The longer it will take and the more difficult it is. In addition, the size of the land that those people are on, the bigger it is. So if you're trying to control 1,000 people and they're in a little square block, a lot easier to control, a lot easier to kill them, control them, whatever it is. Whereas if they were spread out across 10 square miles, right, that would take, or 100 square miles, or a state, it would take a lot longer just to hunt them all down. So, and they would be more apt to hide and that type of stuff. So the population density does make some difference in there. Even America, we have a lot of land, but they're dense populations in certain areas. It's easier to control population density. So I'll take a look at that. Technological advantages, clearly the U.S. military has technological advantages over most people in the world. Training advantages come and go. Again, not every soldier is a trained SEAL. Those are the elitists, special ops people and stuff like that. A lot of people are cooks, or who knows, purchasing people or whatever it is. So not everybody's as trained as you think, even though, we have a couple million people in the military or whatever. And not all non-citizens are untrained, so we have to take a look. But in general, organized armies have a little bit of training advantage. They've done it. And strategies make some difference, whether you're going to fight, a conventional war or guerrilla warfare. Most wars since like Vietnam has been in America, or American foes have been a guerrilla type. It's guerrilla tactic over the last 50 years or so is pretty common tactic. Sometimes it wins, sometimes it loses. A lot of wins though. Very difficult to versus a conventional war. And of course, I think you'd be doing some guerrilla tactics if you were facing the American government. You just wouldn't face them head up. You wouldn't step in front of the M16 or the Gatling gun or whatever. So let's take a look at some control examples over the last 50 or 60 years of experiences by large military invading locales. And I'll start with the locales up top. And it doesn't have to be necessarily the Americans, although the Americans involved in 3 of these. I've got the Soviets in there and the Great Britain, basically. So Northern Ireland, I did these by population size. I got 4 of them, like I said. So the location was Northern Ireland, and from 1960 to 1990-ish, Great Britain tried to squelch the Irish Republican Army and they used a lot of guerrilla type tactics with explosives, bombings, and other shoot and blend. But they had only a 2 million population, it's not 5 square miles, 5,000 square miles. That should be 1,000 square miles. So 5,000 square miles. So the density was medium density, but it was a 30-year war, and eventually a truce was called. So that Great Britain never made a lot of headway. Now they'll also say we're just here to enforce, the police or something, right? But they definitely, if they could have taken care of the opposition, they would have, and they didn't for 30 years. So it was pretty futile. Afghanistan is 32 million and a pretty big landmass, so the density is not quite as high. It's a low density. A lot of mountains, a lot of stuff like that. But they've twice been invaded. They were invaded by the Soviets from, I don't know, 78 to 90. So there was a 10-year attempt, and we've been probably in Afghanistan for 10 years currently, and neither one is going to leave with either one of us taking over the Afghans. Again, we're chasing terrorists and not doing it. It's all about spinning it, right? But clearly we're not going to occupy Afghanistan, as the Soviets couldn't either. And so, a force of 32 million with a population density out there, and they didn't have super advanced, they're, small weapons or rifles and stuff, not very sophisticated. Iraq, obviously we blitzkrieged them once. I didn't get rid of them, blitzkrieged them again, so we were pretty successful quickly in the first couple months with superiority and dropping bombs at range, but we've never occupied particularly well. And that's a 37 million population with 169,000 square miles, so a little more dense, low to medium density. We've been fighting non-contiguous for like 15 years there, right? And not really been successful. And Vietnam was the big one. Sort of first started modern guerrilla tactics. I listed the population for current Vietnam. Of course, that's North and South now. 91 million and 128. But obviously, when we were fighting on behalf of the South, and the North was a significantly less population, so more like what you saw in Iraq or whatever. Pretty dense, so it should have been pretty controllable, other than the jungles and the tunnels and all the other stuff. But basically, we did a 15-year war from like 1960 to 1975, kind of left there with our tail between our legs, and immediately the North took over the South, and now it's the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and we haven't gone back, and so kind of a loss there. So basically the U.S. couldn't really invade any of those three with that population, and neither could the Soviets, and neither could the British, right? So looking at the military side of things, again, the big invaders in this particular scenario were the UK, Russia, and USA. And UK, 65 million people, pretty dense. Russia, only 144 million, so not a lot of people, but very sparse. And America has 324 million, so pretty significant amount of people. Again, large force, pretty big land mass at over 3 million square miles, so very low density. So, it'd be a difficult opponent for people to invade. And then I put a couple references out there, like China is clearly one of the most populous, if not the most populous, pretty close with India, with over 1 billion people and about the same landmass as USA. So more density, but just the sheer number of people be kind of futile to attack Chinese on a ground force type level. And I put California out there because that's pretty close to Iraq, because the scenario I'm going to come back to is, say, we couldn't take over Iraq, probably U.S. military could have a difficult time taking over California. Never mind the United States of America, right, in its general. So I don't think that, it's very viable that we would take it over. So basically the USA has had difficulty with past experiences against inferior opponents, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the current ISIS. In those conflicts, there are supply chains back to the U.S. supporting the troops, and that may not be the case if the military attack the citizens of the United States, unless they harbored their planes and stuff elsewhere. And in those conflicts, there were safe zones to reside, like bases, or to land, and that may not be the case if you were attacking the U.S. citizens. We would first take the airfields, right, and the planes. The desertion rate in those conflicts were average, and I think that's 12% or whatever the desertion rate for your army normally is. Whereas if you're an army attacking your own citizens, like your own parents and siblings, right? That desertion rate might be a lot higher, so that's something to think about. That you might not get the full force of the U.S. military when it's attacking its own citizens. But there's approximately 2 million active duty personnel, plus maybe another million domestic police, so you could target those all together as one group. The police are pretty advanced nowadays with their weaponry. So 3 million people, but obviously the USA just has a huge population with a large land size, so it's not optimal or preferred to fight against the citizens of the United States, even with the superiority of the military. They're not going to go nuclear. They're just going to be taking, we're going to take the planes out pretty quickly, or at least the landing zone for the planes, unless they go offshore. And you're going to have to rely on some outside interest to land those suckers, because just the sheer number of people would overwhelm, even with not guns, right? So the possibilities are, if citizens armed with simple guns like rifles, where they could snipe, definitely the U.S. military would have a tough time defeating an opponent the size of California, never mind the entirety of America. That task would become near impossible if the U.S. military had to operate all the resources in California. So in other words, if they were trying to do the entire United States and they're trying to land all their stuff here, that would quickly get overrun for air superiority, and that would be really tough, because now the numbers don't work out. 2 million versus, I don't know, 200 million, 300 million, 200 million fighters, 150 million fighters. Just the numbers are just ridiculous. So defeating the entire country by the U.S. military would be unlikely, with or without guns. Even if we, like I said, due to the size, the arming of the U.S. citizens, even with like wooden spears or our fists, right, or knives, machetes, that we had to get close and we had to overrun bases by sending 1,000 people in, we would also likely defeat those military. They would take out a significant amount of us, but the numbers just wouldn't add up. So that's what I think. Let me see what you think. Doesn't really, just something that's kind of an oddball scenario that people get in arguments with, and they say the U.S. military would wipe out the population and control them fairly easily, and I'm not so sure about that. All right, see ya.